When a disaster strikes, we all have this image in our heads, right? Of a perfect system just clicking into place. Police, fire, EMS, everyone moving as one. But what happens when that system doesn't work? Or maybe more importantly, what happens in those first few minutes, even hours, before that system can even get there? We're going to explore what a truly integrated response looks like, and you might be surprised where it actually begins.
So picture this. It's the Pulse Nightclub in Orlando, Florida, back on June 12th, 2016. It's just a normal night. And then suddenly a loud pops just cut right through the music. For a few seconds, nobody really knows what's happening. Is it just part of the show? But then there are more shots, and all that confusion just turns to absolute terror. And that quote right there, that is the absolute core of what we're talking about today. See, we tend to think of an emergency response starting with flashing lights and professionals storming in. But that's not where it starts. It begins with the people who are caught right in the middle of it all. The ones who had no plan to be heroes, but who suddenly realize that just waiting around is not an option anymore. So this is the big question we have to ask ourselves. If the response doesn't start with the professionals, then who is holding things together in those first absolutely critical moments? The answer? Well, it might just change how you see your own role in an emergency. Okay, let's really dive into this. We're going to have to redefine what it even means to be a first responder. Because public safety, it turns out, doesn't actually begin with someone in a uniform. It begins with you. The term for this is citizen responder, and honestly, it's a total game changer. This idea really exploded into the national conversation after the 9/11 Commission report came out. It pointed out a simple but pretty stark truth. The very first people on any scene are the ones who are already there. They're the ones holding it all together before the professionals can even get close. So how do people actually do this? I mean, in the middle of chaos and fear, how do ordinary people step up? Well, it turns out they often step into a few key roles. They hold the line. So let's break down the 4 ways they do it. So what are these citizen responders actually doing? It really boils down to 4 crucial roles. You've got the communicator, who gets the word out, the protector, who creates safety, the healer, who gives that immediate care, and the witness, who gathers vital information. And the thing is, these aren't assigned roles. They're just instinctive actions people take when somebody has to step up. First up, the communicator. Think about it. The official response system can't move without information. Inside Pulse, you had people hiding in bathrooms, terrified, but whispering updates to 911 dispatchers. Their texts, their calls, they gave law enforcement the very first picture of what was going on inside a building they couldn't even enter yet. That was the real start of the response. Next, you have the protector. Now, this isn't about fighting the bad guy. It's about creating safety. Imran Yusuf, a Marine veteran working security, he knew the sound of gunfire instantly. And what did he do? He kicked open a locked back door. It was a single decisive action that let about 70 people get out. He didn't stop the threat. He created an escape route. Then there's the healer. And you do not need a medical degree to save a life. A survivor, Joshua McGill, he managed to escape, but then he found a man outside who was bleeding badly. With zero training, he just took off his own shirt, tied it around the man's arm as a tourniquet, and held on, applying pressure until he could get him to an officer. He just used what he had. And finally, the witness. When professional responders arrive, they're walking in completely blind. The survivors who escaped Pulse, they shared every single detail they could remember: where the shooter was, where people were hiding, who was hurt. Each of those little details helped build the intelligence that was needed to plan the official entry. Okay, so we see these incredible, spontaneous acts by individuals. But what happens when the professional systems they are desperately trying to connect with are, well, broken? See, the problem isn't a lack of effort from people. It's a lack of connection in the structure itself. This slide really gets to the heart of the issue. For decades, our public safety agencies were basically built as separate silos. Police, fire, EMS, each had its own rules, its own plan, but disasters don't care about those boundaries. They demand a single, connected system. And trying to build that in the middle of a crisis, it is a recipe for failure. And here's the thing. This isn't a new problem, not by a long shot. The failure of our systems to connect is a really tragic pattern, kind of like a ghost that haunts the entire history of disaster response. This timeline is basically a recurring nightmare. In 1985, a police operation in Philadelphia spirals into a massive fire. In '92,
Hurricane Andrew exposes a shocking lack of coordination in the relief effort. And then in '95, the Oklahoma City bombing reveals a medical system that was just completely unprepared for a mass casualty event. 3 different disasters, one devastating theme. Our systems were not talking to each other.
So let's just look at the fallout here. In the Move bombing, no unified command meant an entire neighborhood burned down. After Hurricane Andrew, you had agencies fighting over who was in charge while survivors went without food and water for days. And in Oklahoma City, the lack of a regional medical plan meant hospitals were totally swamped and lives were lost that probably could have been saved. We're not talking about simple administrative errors here. These were catastrophic failures with a real human cost. So the crucial point here is that we have 2 powerful truths that we have to hold at the same time. First, the real response begins with citizen responders. And second, our professional systems are often just not built to connect with each other. The only way forward is to bridge that gap. So what's the big takeaway from all this? In those critical first minutes, it's not about waiting around for a hero to show up. It's about being the person who makes the call, the person who finds the exit, the person who stops the bleeding. These are the simple, powerful actions that form the bedrock of survival.
This quote just says it all, doesn't it? In every single disaster, from Pulse to 9/11, the human element has been absolutely heroic. People show up, they act, they risk everything. The effort is always, always there. The problem has always been the connection between people, between different agencies, and between the systems we all rely on. So I'm going to leave you with this question to think about. Whether it's at your job, at your school, or just in your community, you are part of a system. And the next emergency isn't a question of if it's going to happen, but when. So where are the gaps in the systems you rely on every single day? And what role might you play in bridging them?